Hello, I'm Julia, and this video is all about my string quartet number 13. In this one, I wanted to play around with an unusual time signature, so this one is in 5/4. And that's partly because the orchestra I was playing with at the time was doing a program that included Shostakovich's Second Piano Concerto and also Borodin's Symphony No. 2. And there are influences of both of those pieces in this piece. But both of those play around with time signature. The last movement of the Borodin switches between 3/4 and 2/4, and its theme is effectively in 5. And the Shostakovich contains these very percussive sections in 7/8 in its last movement, along with a lot of other time signatures. So my aim was to make this feel as though it's in a regular time signature, not to have a lurch where you have the extra beat or the missing beat, depending on how you look at it, but to try and make 5 in a bar sound normal. Why shouldn't it? So it's a fast, very lively piece, and it's basically in sonata form. So we open with a first subject in the tonic, which is C minor. It's relatively consistent rhythmically, although we get this linking passage where I've played around a bit with the 3 against 2, so you have triplets against quavers, and also some phrasing across the bar line. So in that section we lose our bearings just for a moment, which makes the return of the theme at C more emphatic. There is another nod to Borodin with these soltando triplets. Again, that's something that crops up in his second symphony. It's not something that the software mimics particularly well, but hopefully it gives enough of an idea. And then at E, we move into a totally different key. We have a second subject in E minor, and I think perhaps lurking in the back of my mind was Beethoven, as modulating to the medium was something he did a fair bit of. So we have a second subject, and just to confuse matters, it occasionally gets punctuated by these 3 accented chords in the 3/4 bars. So going back to Borodin and Shostakovich, neither of them stuck entirely within their unusual time signatures. There was usually a return at some point to a more usual time signature, and that's what happens here. And these accented chords are important because it's these that eventually take us back to our first subject, at least the first time round for the repeat of the exposition, and the second time to a diminished chord and then a general pause. The development starts with material from the first subject, but this time in F major, so quite a long way from the C minor that we started with. But because there's no F in the bass, it feels a bit unsettled, at least to begin with. We've got the C as the lowest note of the chord, so it's basically a second inversion. So it feels as though it needs to go somewhere, and go somewhere it does. It builds in terms of dynamics, and we get into a very definite A minor with elements of the second subject coming in to play off against the theme from the first subject. These accented chords from the second subject make a reappearance set against the triplets that were part of the linking passage in the first subject, so there's material coming in from all over the place, but most of it we've heard before somewhere along the way. All of this takes us at J into A flat minor, or perhaps better written as G sharp minor. So we're now extremely remote from where we started, and it feels quite dark and a bit lost at this point. But at K we find a glimmer of light that points us back towards our home. Those accented chords take us back into C minor, which is our home key. There's still a lot going on, so we're not quite home yet, but there's a feeling of familiarity, a sense that we might be getting somewhere. And sure enough, it's those accented chords again that take us home, finally, into the recapitulation at L. The recapitulation is not a precise repeat. There are a few extra notes that don't quite belong in our C minor, but by and large we're home. It's just ramped up a little bit. But of course, because this is sonata form, we don't want to follow it completely home, because that's then going to take us back into E minor and away from where we want to be. So we have a transition which gets us this time to the second subject in C minor, the tonic. happy. And this leads into what is effectively a long coda, which very firmly settles us in C minor and brings in elements of the first and second subjects and joins them back together. I like this idea of taking the two themes that were originally separate and eventually merging them. After all, they've danced around each other enough in the development, so it seems like a logical conclusion to finally join them together. So we have the accented chords of the second subject against the first subject, and eventually it's the accented chords that win out. They don't quite resolve, they just leave you hanging. It didn't really feel like it wanted to resolve.